The underground is a pretty large place compared to what we see it as in-game, and something I've wondered for a while is how it even functions in the first place. Like, if we assume monsters need food and water like humans do, what systems are in place for water in places like Hutland? My main goal here is to give some ideas on how all these things function and what the places may be like or how they exist in some cases, but to be fair, much of this is just speculation on my end and may make absolutely no sense. Also, while this will be split into segments, I may go on side tangents to explain things that affect most of the underground instead of just a singular area like the ruins or Hutland, so keep that in mind. Anyway, because I'm only just starting to write the script and I'm already certain my editing software will have crashed at least once by this point, and I want to get this out by the anniversary, let's just get on with it already. The ruins is by far the most disconnected part of the underground, with Asgore having practically no jurisdiction in it given that Toriel sealed it off from the rest of the underground. If we're assuming there's only one entrance, which is some pretty terrible design in my opinion when you're literally living in a cave that could collapse at any moment. Something that I've noticed though is that the monsters still living in the ruins seem to have an odd theme, being frogs and bugs for the most part. I don't know about you, but when I think of those kind of things, I think more of like a swamp sort of thing, maybe a marsh? I don't really know what the difference is, but I think you get what I mean. Basically what I'm saying is that I think the ruins could have originally been somewhat marsh-like, and that's why it seems to be mostly built on bricks and doesn't have any real natural areas like the rest of the underground, except for New Home. This could mean that Waterfall and the ruins could have originally been similar, which adds on to an idea I have later on. This also would be an explanation for the waterways that... Hey. Wait a minute. Alright, there we go. Are right here, and are around various parts of the ruins we see. It's possible these could be man-made, monster-made, canals from Waterfall, but it's hard to say for certain. I also may mention for story purposes that this could be a reason for monsters to stay in the ruins for a long time, given that it would take a while to develop it until they could reach Snowdin, given that it would be a marsh. Those are pretty historically hard to develop in, I think. Something I'll point out here, given that I think it's important, is that the core is probably really old, like it's existed since at least before Toriel sealed off the ruins, since I doubt the ruins could function alone with its more rudimentary electricity systems given its age compared to the rest of the underground. In turn, I'm pretty sure the ruins are connected to the core, explaining the electricity the place probably has, given that at least the phones Toriel has would need it. Because I'm assuming she probably has multiple, because I don't think she managed to take all of them back from the other children that died. I don't know where did she get all these phones, actually, now that I think about it. Where did she get these? Why does she have so many phones? Why? Why does she need that many? Did she, like, magically just get them? Did they have, like, a stockpile of phone storage in, like, New Home or something, and she just took, like, 8 of them or something before leaving? Anyways, I just went really off of script, so I'm gonna try not doing that. I mess up a lot more when I do that, if you can't notice from all the cuts I've already done. Food-wise, the ruins are shown to be somewhat simple. It's safe to assume that many of the smaller monsters may eat bugs and other things of that sort, so they can almost definitely eat physical food despite being made of mostly magic. Given that Frogget has a fly attack and is a frog monster, it's hard to say what the other monsters could eat. Toriel is a bit more confusing, given that while the snail she has in Snail Pie, that she doesn't make unless you're in hard mode, could be explained, the other things she would need to make a pie are harder to figure out how she would even get them. Like, given this Frogget here, we know that Toriel had to buy the ingredients for the pie, probably from the rest of the town that we see. Which, may I add, is already a little weird, given that she supposedly came out of the same place we went to with the things to make a pie? Like, do you see any stairs or anything here? How did she get there? Personally, I think Toriel jumped like 100 feet down to the town and climbed back up the side of the wall like she was climbing a mountain, but that's beside the point. I would draw it if I was capable of drawing Toriel, but I think you can pretty clearly tell I'm not able to do that. This means that either specific monsters use magic to create food items, since if Toriel could just use magic to make it herself, why would she go buy literally any of it? Or farming could somehow exist in some way in the underground, where these things are obtained. But what about the lack of sunlight? You may be asking, but it is possible that if monsters had been underground for a long time, that they could have found ways to farm without sunlight, maybe using artificial lighting, like we probably see a lot of, just not seeing the ceiling, or somehow managing to create plants that don't need sunlight to grow with some sort of, like, selection, evolution thingy. I don't really know the exact name. Artificial selection? I think that's the word? Yeah, probably. Honestly though, I think my first idea was probably more realistic to Undertale with its amazing logic that it doesn't have. Snowdin in of itself is already really weird of a place from the get-go, given that it is a literal snowy forest in a mountain. How do the trees survive? Are they all evolved not to need sunlight? Where did the snow come from? Well, I have an answer to at least one of those questions, being that I have some sort of a theory on how Snowdin functions and is so cold. There's a thing in nature that can rarely occur called cold air pools, which can trap cold air in a topographic depression, given cold air being denser and all that. Snowdin could maybe be one of these places, given that while supposedly these places would be normal temperature in the day, there isn't really a daytime or sunlight when you're like a mile into a cave, so that wouldn't really be a problem here. This is also the time for that thing I said we'd talk about later on, being that I think there's an underground sort of reservoir, or like a lake, right above Mount Ebott. The other direction from where we see it, the end of the pacifist route, pretty obviously, unless there's a secret lake in the forest there. I doubt that, though. Typically you can see those. Maybe not a river, but definitely a lake. I think if it exists, it would stretch from at least the ruins to just into Hutland, given that River Person can, well, bring you there. In large enclosed areas, such as Snowdin, rain and clouds could actually develop if the place is as large as shown in the game, meaning rain could actually happen, and it may be boosted by high humidity from a nearby reservoir. Under the right conditions, such as in a cold air pool, that rain may turn into snow. That's the best answer I've got for how Snowdin can actually exist in a mountain. I do think that at one point Snowdin could have been like Waterfall as well, meaning that it's possible the ruins, Snowdin, and Waterfall were all a combined marshland, since some rooms in Snowdin look similar to Waterfall, like the room where you meet Glide and all that is literally Waterfall pretty much. If this is the case, Snowdin may have had some sort of catastrophic event, maybe being something like a really high magnitude earthquake, which could have happened before or after monsters settled, that caused it to move downwards and freeze over because it trapped so much cold air. Another more simple theory could be that Snowdin is just in a bad position, since Waterfall and New Home have Hutland right next to it to keep it warm along with sunlight for New Home, and the ruins also has sunlight, while Snowdin is the farthest from any heat source, but the other theory is cooler, I think. Oh, so why is the underground scene as crowded when there is literally this entire area here with one guy in it? Like, are you all stupid, or is that guy just ungodly rich and owns it all? Waterfall is really a pretty simple place compared to the rest of the underground. I don't think I need to explain where the water is here, since Waterfall probably serves as the water source for Snowdin, Hutland, and itself. I'll talk more about New Home later. I do want to point out that we get more direct confirmation from Waterfall that the underground is probably connected to a lake instead of a reservoir, given that the dump is filled with stuff from humans, and a pretty much constant amount of it. Damn, wherever Mount Ebott is has to really work on their environmental laws. So something I want to point out here that is a bit more of a headcanon, but I think makes sense, is that I'm pretty sure Undertale takes place in the late 21st century. I'm pretty sure of this since the Nose Nuzzle Championship happened in, as said by the dogs, 98. Given that Toriel and Asgore won it, and probably divorced around 2020, Chara fell in the 2010s and was still a child when they died, that 98 had to be 1998. But here's the thing. The dogs still say 98. Not 1998, they say 98 like it was the most recent 98 to happen. Anyway, the reason I'm bringing this up now is because of how old all the stuff in the underground seems to be for the era it's in, and we get that stuff from the dump. The underground's still using the more boxy TVs into the modern day, even with some exceptions like Sans Papyrus' house, even though you also see in Mettaton's house that he has the box TV. This either means that the surface is behind, or the lake Waterfall could be connected to has actually seen some more restrictions on dumping literal entire TVs and computers into the water, and much of the stuff is from a while ago because of that. Before we point out the core, I do think that the underground has a couple things ahead of humans, since they would spend most of their research on developing things beneficial to their survival, such as a massive magic generator, which I'll get into more later in its section. Waterfall obviously has a lot of water, but one thing I think is important to point out is that a good chunk of it, a lot of it actually, may be unsafe for drinking. I mean, think about it. A lot of the water shown seems to be stagnant, and a large portion of the moving water shown is connected to the dump. I don't think this completely pollutes all of Waterfall's water, of course, but I do think that maybe some of the water has to be treated to supply everyone. I'd say if this is the case, the plant would probably be in Hutland, given the machinery available and easy access to high temperatures to get rid of bacteria. Also, Undyne's house probably uses some form of transportable fire magic I'll get into later for its stove, given that while it looks like a gas stove to me, given the fire from the dial thingy, I don't want to open the can of worms of the underground having natural gas or oil in it, because that's its own whole thing. So, no thank you. Also, the fact that Undyne's house continues to burn for hours despite it being in Waterfall could mean that Waterfall has a pretty low humidity despite all of the water. Food-wise, I think if the agriculture theory thing I had from earlier was right, Waterfall may be the best place for making food other than the ruins or new home. The soil quality is a bit skeptical to me, given that it is literally blue and mostly rock, but the fact that other parts of Waterfall can hold substantial plant life gives me the idea it could still be good enough in some places. Not to mention that the water availability would help. Can you tell I didn't have much to say in the section actually about Waterfall specifically? Hutland was probably the second most difficult part of this whole thing to figure out, if I'm gonna be honest. One of the big reasons I say that is that, well, I know it's for meta purposes, Hutland is apparently hot enough to evaporate cups, but at the same time, Snowy's family lived there. A bird creature thing. Given that it's for meta purposes, I'm going to assume that Hutland is hot, but not burning hot. Maybe helped by a lot of the heated air being funneled into the cooler Waterfall and new home. Another thing about how Hutland itself is like is that it may actually be the worst type of hut, humid hut. Why I think this travesty could be the case is because of how air works. Okay, so I originally had a massive tangent here about how the science of air works or something, but I'm pretty sure that's really boring, so I'm actually not going to put it here. But if for some reason enough of you want to see me try and talk about how air works based off of memory from 4 years ago, I could make it into a short or something when I figure out how that works. Anyway, back to the game with talking flowers and skeletons who can fly. Hutland is pretty much the same question as Snowdon, being how it even exists as a burning hellscape, compared to a frozen hellscape. I think this is probably pretty simple to answer, with Hutland probably being lower down than Snowdon even is, but not having the exact same effect since it isn't closed in like a bowl. Mount Everett is probably an inactive volcano, but still retains access to the magma chamber beneath it. I think that's the right word, I really don't remember. If it's not, I mean, I said it wasn't. Hutland just happens to be where the underground reaches into it. This probably also means that Hutland is in about the dead center of the mountain, because I'm pretty sure that's how that works. Maybe not. I don't know, I didn't do much research on this. Hutland gets most of its water either from Waterfall or the river connecting to it, since it probably is heated enough to kill most bacteria. Either that or the treatment plant I said earlier in Waterfall does actually exist. The food is almost definitely imported from Waterfall or New Home if monsters can't make it, since I really don't think lava is very good for agriculture, but I may be wrong. Hutland is surrounded by probably the 2 largest food producers in the underground though, so it probably has no trouble with food or anything. Yes, I know Muffet is here, but who has the money to pay 10 times a college tuition to buy a literal donut? The core is the lifeline of the underground's electrical system. Alpha says that most of it, if not all, of the underground's electricity comes from it. The ruins may be an exception, and specifically it creates magical energy, which is probably the underground form of electricity, being separate from the normal version. Somehow. It's kind of hard to tell when we don't really have an easy access to magic. The core doesn't really have any residence since it's an energy plant, but the energy is definitely something to talk about. Unfortunately, for me. The electricity is probably split into both ambient magic for monsters and pipelines and wire electricity. The magic created to be used for appliances is probably a form of pure magic. The machines used by monsters are specifically designed to take this magic and transform it into the type needed. For example, Undyne's stove, which would transform the pure magic into fire magic. This is also probably how Elphys turned Undyne's fridge into a hut fridge, just tweaking the process that altered the magic into one form or another. The core's energy-making process is, according to Elphys, converting geothermal energy into magical energy by... By what, Alphys? By what? Alright, time to go learn how geothermal plants work, I guess. Yippee! Okay, so I based all of this on Wikipedia since I cannot be bothered to do research for Funny Skeleton Game, so take this with an entire kilo of salt. The core probably works through the use of steam, created through heating from magma brought up into the core from the surrounding area, and creating the steam through a nearby underground reservoir that may have high enough pressure to supply the core with the steam necessary. I doubt that singular blocks of ice from Ice Wolf would be enough to replace the size of the core, so that's probably meant more for keeping everything at a certain temperature. This water could be used in many ways, but the most likely option, I think, is that the core is a flash steam power station, which creates electricity through the movement of this heated, high-pressure water into low-pressure containers, creating steam that in turn drives turbines. I'm pretty sure if I read it all correctly. This water is moved by the high pressure itself, high to low pressure like I would have said in the big sciencey section earlier, and as the pressure decreases from this movement, more of the water turns into steam, which then typically either powers a turbine or generator. How this becomes magic is hard to say given that magic isn't a real substance, but it probably functions similar to electricity, and in turn just requires a slightly different set of machinery. Not to mention that I'm pretty sure the type of power station I said was the most common, but I am going off of script and going off of memory from 2-3 weeks ago when I wrote this, so I can't say for certain. Yes, I'm procrastinating that much. Yes, I know it's September 11th, and that the whole I have to finish everything in 4 days. Be quiet, I did this to myself. New Home is pretty much a carbon copy of the ruins, but is connected to the rest of the underground, at least. If you remember from earlier, I didn't include New Home as a place that takes water from Waterfall, mostly because if it is so similar to the ruins, it probably was also a marsh as well, meaning that there is a chance that a long time ago the entire underground minus Hutland was just Waterfall. In turn, New Home has a lot of water as well. Also, for some reason the water in the ruins is called fake water in the sprites. Not sure what's up with that. I'm just putting this here in the script because I just realized this and I'm too stubborn to change the script now, and I've already said it in the voiceover, so whatever, I know I just did, but be quiet. You don't have to know that, even though you do know that. New Home also probably makes a lot of food since it seems to have more access to light from the surface than any other place in the underground if Asgore's throne room is anything to go off of. New Home does certainly have access to the core though, which would set it apart from the ruins if that place gets its energy from something else, even though it's kind of hard to say that for certain since we don't really have a established insert year here on the core. Yeah, New Home didn't really have much going on. This place doesn't either though, to be fair. I'm separating the barrier from New Home because I feel like it warrants its own section with how weird it can be at points. One thing about the barrier is that inanimate objects can clearly pass in and out of it, since we see stuff like the things from the dump go into the underground, while Azrael is able to carry Chara's body out of the underground, even though it gets a little confusing with Flowey. Another thing about the barrier that really bugs me is the neutral ending. Cause Frisk never takes Asgore's soul, right? But at the end of the fight with Omega Flowey, despite the fact that he clearly never absorbed Frisk's soul, or anything of that sort, since he explicitly says so, Frisk is past the barrier. The only way that should have been able to happen is that Flowey could somehow bring Frisk with him across the barrier, despite Frisk only having one soul. The implications of this are both hilarious and kind of sad to me. I mean, this could mean that any being able to cross the barrier can bring someone who can't with them without pretty much any trouble. This could mean that Azrael and Chara could have literally just helped every other monster pass through the barrier, and none of the events of Undertale would have happened. The other humans might still fall underground, but it's probably less likely, not to mention that humans would probably break the barrier then. Anyway, because this whole script is 8 pages long, and I will probably have a grand time procrastinating on this, like I said earlier, I predicted this very good back in August, I'm going to end it with that. All this is pretty much just speculation on my part, but I really felt like making this both to include some points about Undertale that I feel aren't talked about enough, And also, since I haven't really seen anyone go over how the underground actually works in depth, even though there is like a 50-50 chance I'm just really blind, which is entirely possible. Hopefully, very hopefully, if I can do stuff over the weekend, this is releasing on time for Undertale's 10th anniversary. And I also made this because of that. Given that I felt like I had to do something for this game that has practically constructed me as a person in the past few years, along with a couple other games, but this one is definitely up there. And this game matters so much to me that it actually got me to get up and make a video for it, which I assure you is a very, very high bar. I can barely speak more than 5 sentences before wheezing to death, and you can very clearly see that in how many cuts I've made. I'm not good at this. I'm making this last part of the script in late August, and I'm doing the last part of the voiceover on September 11th. So I'm really excited to see what people make for the anniversary, even though I have seen a couple things released early already, which is pretty cool, and also makes sense. Rather have a more fluid deadline and actually not be like me and spend every single day doing literally anything else until the last 4 days, which I tend to do a lot recently for some reason, specifically 4 days. Anyway. On another note, if I literally ever make more videos, there's a good chance they won't be related to Undertale, so keep that in mind. It's entirely possible they could be, but don't count on it. Anyway, bye now. I've somehow managed to add another whole page to this script. I am Solar, if my username somehow didn't make it aware to you. Do well in your next however long until I make something else, and I'll see you maybe eventually. Goodbye. Okay, I'm done with the sappy stuff. On to the outro. Bye now.